So, real talk for a minute. Have you ever been working on a fundraising or communications project that gets stalled or completely derailed because no one can agree on decisions? Yep, we've all been there, right? Well, today I want to share a tool I use to avoid this common pitfall in projects and keep my projects on track and hopefully get them all completed. Hey there, my name is Vanessa Lockshin, and I'm the president of the Storytelling Nonprofit. Welcome back to my channel for this tutorial. If you tuned into my last video, How to Tell Nonprofit Stories from Scratch, you probably heard me talk about a tool that I use in my storytelling process called the Project Brief. Well, I was totally blown away by how many of you left comments below that video telling me that that tool sounded so useful and you could see yourself using it for more than just storytelling and as a part of other fundraising and communications projects you might be working on. So awesome. So I wanted to make this video to dive into the project brief concept a little bit more with you and tell you, one, what a project brief is, two, how I use it, and three, show you the exact template that I use for my project briefs. All right, so let's start with what a project brief is. So a project brief is essentially a 1 to 2 page document that lays out the most important details of the fundraising or communications project you may be working on. I like to think about it also as a navigation tool, in that anytime I'm working on a project, I want to return to the brief and make sure that I'm still on track with the original details that I outlined and the original vision that me, the team, and other project participants may have had for this project. I also really like using project briefs because it helps to get everyone on the same page about the most important details from the outset of the project. To me, this is really the benefit of using a brief because we go over all the details in the project brief, like the goal, messaging, things like that. And the more we can get everyone to agree on that right at the beginning, hopefully the less disagreements and the less sort of like degenerative discussion we have to have later on in the project. The only thing we need to do is come back to the brief and ask ourselves, is this project still in line with what we originally agreed upon? Hopefully the answer is yes. I think it helps to focus discussion on other important things and hopefully keep us all on task in that project. All right, let's talk about when you should actually use a project brief. So there are so many uses for project briefs, and I want to give you a few examples of some of the times where I've used them in my work. I've used project briefs for things like direct mail, email appeals, communications campaigns, Giving Tuesday campaigns, newsletters that I may be sending out, or even things like social media campaigns. All right, so at this point you might be wondering, well, what exactly goes into a project brief? What do I put in this document to make it really useful for me and for my organization? Well, I'm really glad you're thinking about that, and I want to walk you through the exact template I use for every single project brief. Let's go take a look at mine and I'll walk you through it. All right, so this is what my standard project brief template looks like. I like to customize mine with my own branding and colors and fonts, and you can do the same for your organization as well if you want to keep things on brand. So I put my logo up at the top and we use our fonts as well. So here are some of the basic things that go into this brief for me. So first of all, I always start with sort of a project name. We want to name this thing so we can talk about it in our project plans and our weekly meetings, and so that we all know basically what we're talking about. It might be something like year-end fundraising campaign or August communications campaign. It can be definitely something as simple as that. The next thing I like to do is write down who is the project lead. So typically there is going to be one person who's overseeing this project, and I want to make sure we're all crystal clear about who that person is. And sort of supplementary to that, I want to make sure we know who are the project participants and what are their roles. So let's say I was leading a project. I would say something like Vanessa, who's the consultant. But I might also have project participant roles like Mary, who's the executive director, or Joe, who's the development director of the organization. And those, of course, are their official titles, but I'd also want to make sure I put like, what is their specific role in the project? So for the executive director, it might just be, approving key parts of the project. We might have someone who's a graphic designer, and so I might put their role as designing the layout or something along those lines. So it's helpful just to clarify those things and make sure everyone knows who is doing what and who's responsible for what parts and pieces in this project. So next to my brief, I like to add in the start date and completion date. This is just helpful for overall project planning and project management because, of course, you're probably not just working on this one thing. You've got other things on your plate. And I also like to put down important dates during the project. Now, this may not be relevant for every single thing you do, but I find for things like fundraising campaigns, direct mail appeals, things like that, there's inevitably useful and important dates that you need to remember. Things like when something needs to get to the printer, when it's getting mailed, things like that. It's helpful to have those dates in mind and have them listed out somewhere so that you and your team know kind of the key dates that you're working towards and dates when things need to be done by. So going into this a little bit more, so this is where we start to get into, I think, the really useful information in the project brief. So first and foremost, goals. I think this is a really important part of the project brief. We need to know what our objective is during this project. So sometimes it's really clear cut, like a financial goal that you may have, something along those lines. But you also may have less kind of quantifiable goals. They may be more qualitative goals. And so it's helpful to make sure you know what those are and really flesh them out. I would say inevitably for any kind of fundraising or communications project, you're probably working with a target audience of some kind. And this is where it pays to list out that information. You need to know who you're talking to. This is helpful as you work on the project, as you develop design concepts, all of these things. Integrating the target audience information into that is really, really vital. I would also add for fundraising, if you have segmentation information, this is a great place to put that as well. So the next thing I do in my brief is I kind of outline just the general concept of what's happening. So this is where I try to give like a high level description of what this project is. So if I was writing this brief for a year-end fundraising campaign, I might write something along the lines of, this is a multi-channel fundraising campaign using direct mail, email, and social media. Over the course of December, we'll have X number of touch points with donors in the hopes of raising, X amount of money. The campaign is focused on sort of the warm fuzzies of the holiday season. Maybe it's not actually that, but just to give you an idea of what I might write for something like this. Again, just to give you and your teams kind of some conceptual information about the concept, the project. I find that's a really helpful thing to just kind of outline in this. I also like to make sure that the key message is really clear in the project brief. I find that so many project discussions can really start to derail around messaging. Either people disagree about it, they want to get into really nuanced conversations about the messaging of something. It's better to just figure this out right at the start. So getting this nailed down in your project brief right when you're starting is really helpful. Sometimes you'll have one key message. There might be like 2 or 3 supporting key messages or key things you want to include in the project. This is a great place to put that as well. And for most of the things I work on, there's a story or some kind of narrative that's a part of the project that we're working on. So I have a place in my brief to include that information. So this is where we can kind of talk about what story concept would work, what sort of narrative we're building. And again, just making sure that everyone agrees that that's the direction that should go right from the outset. And finally, the last thing I have in my brief is design notes. And it might seem kind of really early on to think about the design of the project, graphic design and whatnot. But I like to just make sure that we have some initial thoughts about this so that there's not like this whole brand new discussion that happens way late in the project. And also, depending on what it is you're working on, sometimes you need to account for design features and layout and things like that while you're writing or while you're working on this project. I would say, especially if you're doing video or something like that, it's really helpful to think about the design, the visuals, all of those aspects in this project brief. So that's an inside look of what my project brief template looks like. I find it's a really helpful tool for me. It has saved me and my clients so many headaches over the years on the projects and things that we work on. And I hope it'll be helpful for you too. One last thing that I'll say about the project brief is once we've got kind of a draft going of it, the first thing that I do for any project I work on is make sure that the right people, the key stakeholders, all sign off on the template to make sure that we're on the same page about that. And sometimes we have to go through 1 or 2 revisions of the brief to make sure we all agree on it, but trust me, it's well worth the time to do that and to do this right at the outset of the project. So as I said, that's a look at how I use project briefs and what my template looks like. I hope this is really helpful for you as you work on your next fundraising or communication project. Let me know in the comments below if this is something you're going to try out using. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up here on YouTube. And if you'd like more fundraising and communications tutorials, be sure to hit the subscribe button here on my channel for more weekly videos.